Well, good afternoon, and for some morning and some middle of the night. Thank you for joining. So this is the New York HR Analytics Meetup. If you are new to our meetup, welcome. If you are expecting a different type of meetup, you might go surf another link on meetup.com. No yoga will be had in this session. Maybe at the end, someone will facilitate. For those who have not been here before, this meetup is dedicated to growing and expanding the knowledge base, and both the talent and knowledge base for analytics inside of the human resources profession. There's a lot of us on the line here that are either in corporate America or corporate global, working on HR issues through data and analytics inside of organizations. There are many folks on the line that are practicing data scientists from both the corporate side and from a partner vendor side, as well as great industry analysts that think about these issues, and certainly have had a lot of influence on many of us. My name is Jeremy Shapiro. I get to lead the HR analytics practice for Merck Pharmaceuticals in New Jersey, and a huge thanks to our co-runners for this, Stella Pouchard, who we've been now almost 8 years now. We've been doing this together, and with other parts of our organizing team, with Bennett and with Philip as well. Thank you for all of your help, and really excited by today's session. So just as a quick rundown as well, we're going to introduce our speaker in just a moment. Too, if you do have questions or ideas, please use the chat as your main your main venue, and Stella and I will help to kind of try to organize thinking as the presentation goes on. Afterwards, we'll open it up to open dialogue. We'll use the chat. We will use multimodal. We use just kind of live questions as well. And at the end, there's always a section of time that will dedicate to anyone who is looking to hire or is looking to make new contacts from a career standpoint, for you to grow your own career as well. And I would remind everyone, if you haven't already joined the Slack group, it's pretty active. So go join the Slack group. That's a great place to both ask a question, have some conversation, look for opportunities, as well as we all see them too. So with that, I'm particularly excited by our speaker today. So Joe Fuller has graciously agreed to join us and share some of the research that you've done lately. I've been not only reading the white papers, but also listening to some of your podcasts as well on future of work, and it seems like an incredibly timely topic to be working through, particularly in markets with high competition as well. So that's very exciting, and in a time when we have increased volatility, in a time where we have increased burnout, and really a time when for many people around the world, the stressors of new global conflict as well. This is both a welcome respite for me. I can't check CNN while I'm hosting a Zoom, and that's best in itself. So really looking forward to Joe, you're talking, but let me hand the mic to you, and if you would, how do you tell relatives what you do for a living? So how would you describe your day?
Well, thank you, Jeremy and Stella, for the invitation. I'm pleased to be with you. It would be pretty easy for me to tell people, my family members, what I do for my living. My parents, both deceased, were actually both Harvard professors, and my wife, my only brother, his wife, and one of my three sons are all graduates of the Harvard Business School, and all three of my sons are graduates of Harvard College. So, and I was born in what's called the Mount Auburn Hospital, which is about a mile from Harvard Yard, and I will be buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery, which is about another half mile beyond Mount Auburn Hospital. So my entire life will be encompassed in roughly the radius of a mile and a half. So what I do at Harvard is I teach several courses, mostly about general management. I was a CEO for about 30 years before I joined the faculty, so I'm often involved in executive education. And I run two projects at Harvard, one at Harvard Business School called Managing the Future of Work, which Jeremy just referred to, which with a typical expression of Harvard conceit, said that what we're going to do is study the issues that senior executives or policymakers should understand broadly in thinking about how work is evolving. So we're going to talk today about mobility of low wage workers, what we've done, original research on everything from the care economy to skilled immigration to degree inflation to the growth of the high skilled gig economy. About 4 years ago, the president of Harvard asked me to chair a faculty task force, which was an adventure because there were 25 faculty members on it. I was the only one not tenured, but I was also in charge about how Harvard should think about its potential role and skills and employability in the United States. We understand that we have not only an ivory tower reputation, but also an ivory tower reality. But we have a tremendous number of resources, and that led in part to the starting of a inter-school task force, which I co-chair, actually project which I co-chair, called the Project on Workforce. It focuses on lower and middle skills jobs and how we create more pathways to economic opportunity for Americans who are not products of the ivory tower, like at least 3 generations of my family. So today, what I would like to do is share with you some recent research. This research is available in long form on our Managing the Future of Work project website, as is the supporting data. And as Jeremy suggested, almost 200 podcasts over the last 4 years. We have now almost 1.2 million downloads, which is seems like a big number these days. And other of research I've touched on quickly. I want to start though, actually, by a little bit of call to action, because across all my research, I consistently see the same pattern, which is senior executives and companies have very incomplete understanding of the impact on their workforce of otherwise logical policy decisions they make. And they very frequently have good grasp of their actual data. The way I describe it to them is, yes, there really are questions on the back of the test that you haven't looked at, or you are assigning a coefficient of 0 to 3 or 4 variables in an equation, and by not evaluating them in your decision making, you're making the wrong decision. It's not, and it's not catastrophically wrong, otherwise you'd have enterprise failure, but you are frequently, with all the best intentions and with a belief that you've got the right information, you're making decisions that actually cause you to make suboptimal decisions. And that is rife across all areas of HR, and you are the cavalry. You are the people that can start understanding these things, how they express themselves in your employers, and getting them to make better decisions, which will lead them to be more competitive, have more motivated, better workforces, and a competitive advantage, while also doing more good for everything from diversity, inclusion to economic opportunity. So with that, a little bit of a sermon. I know it's only Thursday night. Let me share with you some of my most recently published research, which is a paper called Building from the Bottom Up. And let me give you a little context for it. One thing you consistently see in the academy in searching these subjects is that the labor economists and others do single variable, narrow, deep studies. So they'll say, what is the impact of opioid abuse on labor force participation? It will be a terrific paper, but it will not simultaneously look at 4 other variables, like the consequence of deindustrialization or the lack of availability of post-secondary seats in that same jurisdiction, so you can get a more holistic point of view. And specifically what they don't do, particularly the labor economists, is they don't view the employer as anything other than a plug variable at the end of their equation. So what we do in my project is we always look at the demand side as well as the supply side. And in this case, we looked at employers in the United States, a representative sample, about how they viewed why people got stuck in low wage jobs, what were the opportunities they were creating for low wage workers, what explained why some low wage workers got advanced and got substantial wages and got out of the low wage band versus others that didn't. We also looked at 2 populations of low wage workers, those who had been below 200% of the poverty line and now are above it, have punched their way out of that circumstance, and those who have not. so we contrast their experiences and also ask them how their employment experience influenced that outcome, either being stuck or advancing. So there's three different sets of data, all statistically valid samples of the US workforce or employment base, and that's what I'm going to be drawing on in our conversation. As I said, all of this is available to you on our project website. So let me gratefully weather the technology demons. Nothing went wrong. And let me just start with a little bit of schematic about what I view as a widespread phenomena in the United States, which I'm going to describe as the low wage, high turnover trap. And what we find here consistently is that employers in a lot of industries think that high levels of churn among their low wage workers is some type of God mandated outcome or some element of Newtonian physics. That essentially that what happens is that the foundations for retaining a worker are there, that workers generally actually want to work, stay where they're working now. They're seeking stability in their working arrangements, particularly and especially if they can find some opportunities to advance, because they've already solved a bunch of the hard problems to keep low wage people out of the work or out of the workforce or in transitory positions like transport and caregiving responsibilities. But unfortunately, that companies, because they have this mindset that low wage workers inevitably leave, they don't invest in policies that advance the prospects of those workers such that they can realize that ambition to stay. They compete, if you go around this clockwise, they very weak communications as to what upskilling or advancement opportunities are available. They don't provide significant support, specifically in areas like mentorship and guidance on career pathways. Implementations of policies meant to retain and advance workers is poor. It's not tracked. There are no metrics. Our business intelligence systems endlessly track things like days of inventory that can be promised to customers, but find me one that says what supervisors are correlated with entry-level workers who get promoted. Have yet to see that in any business intelligence system anywhere in dozens of companies. Workers lose hope, and they lose workers who are already experienced and who wanted to stay, but because of these weak signals, weak programs, weak implementations, decide that there's nothing more for them here. And they may leave because all of a sudden the bus route they took is now less frequent, running less frequently, so it's very inconvenient to get to work. So they can get 15 cents more an hour, or $1 more an hour by moving, let's say, to an Amazon, or $3 more. And since there's nothing really, no upside, nothing encouraging them to stay, they leave. That high turnover leads to constant churn. I'll show you some data about that. Management views that as a cost of doing business, but look at what it also does. Employers have to constantly hire, onboard, and train workers who are new to the role. What does that mean about the job definition? Job definition has to be pretty simple because a new person has to be able to do it and be at least minimally effective, which means it's going to be a low productivity job because these are low wage workers. So I'm not getting some super qualified person. And the job description has got to be so simple that someone who's basically just a willing worker shows up and doesn't have a lot of skills already can do it fast. Low productivity, low wage, low turnover, low investment in building that person's skills. So this becomes a flywheel. This becomes a carousel of low wage workers. Now, I've done some previous research that Stella's familiar with called Hidden Workers, Untapped Talent. This has a very perverse effect on the workers, which is the more of these low skilled jobs they take, the less able they are to get considered for positions that are better, that have higher wages and higher skills requirements, which will allow them to get on a pathway to more sustainable economics in their personal lives. Once you become someone who's in a regular series of low wage, high turnover jobs, the AI that powers selection of applicants to be considered actively as candidates kicks in and basically says, figuratively speaking, of course, based on your data, you're really qualified to be a retail clerk or a shift worker at a family style restaurant, but a candidate product manager or a candidate marketing manager or a candidate IT help desk person, no, you work at restaurants, you work part-time, you work, these are the skills you've got, you're not fit for anything else. Because as we know, most AI, particularly primitive AI, is very good at correlation and not very good at causation and exercises no judgment So I want to now tell you about the people in this trap and these two different populations and how they experience the world. First of all, this is 44% of the American workforce. This is not some problem. This is everyone who's serving you a latte, who is going to the back room to check to see if the sweater at Gap is in your size is available, who's delivering your dinner or your packages in Amazon. And of the people who are currently in low wage works, 60% are there for 5 consecutive years or more. So you get locked in. Disproportionately large people get locked into these jobs. And yes, they're the Horatio Alger stories of the person that, works terribly hard, goes to community college at night, gets a qualification, punches their way out of the corner, and that's great. We should celebrate it, but it's a fairly rare occasion. And yes, there are the graduates of Yale Drama School who go to Broadway and try to become a star and ultimately say it's not going to work. And they go to General Assembly and become a coder and work for one of you, and they're one of the 4 in 10 who escape. But the vast majority of the people who are in these jobs stay in these jobs and it becomes a life sentence. They're also diverse. So they tend to be um, uh, uh, higher ratio of ethnic and racial minorities, and they tend to be more women. This is an important issue in the future of a point I'll make about companies' commitment to DEI. So I said this is endemic just to shows you for multiple industries that are high turnover, the annualized rate of turnover pre-COVID in these industries and the average salary in these industries. And you may be picking out an industry that you work in, or you have a spouse or sibling or friends that work in. But I just want to point out a few things. The low rate of turnover is 53%. That's eye-watering. If you had a 53% turnover rate on your staffs, on your white collar staffs, you would be frantic, I dare say. In addition to that, your supervisor would be saying, since very often people quit bosses, not companies, I wonder if my colleague, in this case you, are a very good manager. So we've got entire big sectors of the economy. Sometimes it's so baffling, I can't help but laugh, that assume that 70, 80% annual turnover in their workforce is a normal state of affairs. And I think all of you are, certainly in the areas you occupy, the responsibilities you occupy in your companies would know immediately that the business, the math of this type of turnover is horrendous. Not just because you end up with bad outcomes for workers in those low wage, low productivity jobs, which no one wants to invest in upskilling because people always leave. So I don't want to pay for training people who are going to take off. But it's also just all the transaction costs, all the wasted time of supervisors onboarding somebody new, all the costs paid to recruit new people, signing bonuses now, or then the ramp to productivity, then the softer costs. We know, for example, and it's really come out in COVID, that people gain psychological permission to think about quitting and going and doing something else when people around them quit to go do something else. So the systems costs here are much, much greater than most companies understand. Hence my challenge to you, help your employers understand this or other systems effects using the power of data and the analytical tools that are now becoming available to people in order for your management teams to gain the support they need to make better management decisions. Now, what we can see across industries, and this is more COVID data, is that when you have high turnover, guess what happens? You end up having to raise your wage rates, especially in the type of labor environment we've got now. So you can see quit rates, just a sample of November 2021 on the horizontal axis, growth in average hourly earnings, and I'm sure you all agree that we can fit a line to this data with a pretty good R squared attached to it. Now let's come back to a fundamental proposition of allowing this low wage, high turnover trap economy to continue. We asked the workers on both sides of our sample, or 2 samples of workers first, you don't make a lot of money. Who's responsible for you gaining some upward mobility? Who owns that? Is someone supposed to explain that to you? 71% of US workers said, I'm responsible. I have agency over this. I have to figure this out. And by the way, I did that analysis of 14 countries, and if we were live together, I might ask for someone to guess of those 14 major economies, what country came in last. Yes, it is France. where the individual is third after the government, which is the first place winner, the gold medal winner, and my employer is the silver medal winner. So there's some platitudes that Americans have about other countries that at least borne out by that data. Very importantly, we also ask these workers, all things being equal, would you like to stay where you are? And depending on the industry, that number ranged between the low 60s, high 50s to the low 70s. But a significant percentage across all industries, 62% said, I would like to stay at my company if I could make some more, I could get some training, or I could get a promotion of some type. Why, we asked. Well, I kind of belong in my company, said 2/3 of them. I like my company. They treat me pretty well. I think I could move up here. There are other factors here as well, as I just want to cycle back to. For low-wage workers, very often there's a lot of practicum to getting employed because you don't have a lot of slack economic resources. Maybe you don't have a car, or you don't have a reliable car. You rely on a parent or even a friendly neighbor to take care of your toddler or to look in on your mom. And those relationships are fragile. Let's say I am relying on a neighbor and the neighbor moves. Let's say I am relying on mass transit and their cutbacks, and mass transit's not reliable. Now, instead of getting on the 7 o'clock bus, I've got to get on the 6 a.m. bus. All of a sudden, that equilibrium I need to make this work is fractured. But what I want employers to take out of this is the notion that your workers are chomping at the bit to leave is wrong. And what they're really looking for are reasons to stay, not reasons to leave. And if we can give them more reasons to say, that turnover that we think is inevitable and God's will start coming down, and potentially dramatically. And there are specific companies. I point to HEB, the big grocer in Texas, as an example of a company that has very interesting and innovative policies in these areas and has much lower turnover than its competitors, or its peer-sized service companies and low-wage workforces in the greater Texas area. In all honesty, there's one thing I have to admit: they are a private company with strong family ownership, so they probably undergo a different calculus than some of your employers do. Now, there are questions we then ask workers of, well, is your company offering a setting for you to move up to realize those ambitions? You can see on the left-hand side, we ask them, does your company describe what you need to do? And you'll note that while a third do say, the workers say, always or often, it's clear, what's the pathway for me? Almost 40% say rarely or never. And also, very distressingly, a third of the entire sample of workers that have not been advanced says, there's no chance I'm moving up. So if we start thinking across these populations, yeah, there's some good employers. And they do make these pathways available. That doesn't mean that all the workers will be able to avail themselves of that opportunity, but at least they're available, and they're communicated in a way, important message, that the workers apprehend. That 32% of these low-wage workers, often low educational attainment, only about 20% of these people have a post-secondary credential, and many of them are going to be that 4 in 10 who escape. If 32% of workers, the message is sinking in, someone is doing it right. If 37% rarely or never have such an opportunity, and a third are convinced there's no opportunity, there will be types of employers where there is none. A very small company, for example, its owner-operator probably doesn't have many advancement positions if they're in the service industry. But it's clear that a lot of companies aren't taking minimum steps to make themselves more attractive for these workers who aspire to stay. Now, as Jeremy mentioned, I teach at Harvard, and therefore I'm obliged to overcomplicate at least one slide to try to impress on people how sophisticated we are. Now, this is a great audience to talk through this because you'll have a much better grasp of this than the typical executives. Here we looked at how employers evaluate their own performance on the vertical axis versus how workers evaluate the performance of their employers on the horizontal axis. And we did it for 60 different, what we call touch points, that are organized in 6 categories of interaction with workers, which are designated by the color of the data points. So you'll notice the light blue, what's the employee attitude toward upward mobility? That's all the blue dots. Mentorship, the crimson color. And you can see by looking at this diagram a couple of things. First of all, there are very, very and the Net Promoter Score says how many people said always or often versus how many people said never or seldom or don't know. Because often for a low wage worker, don't know means there's no policy that anyone's ever told me about. I'm not sure, but if I don't know about it, then whatever policy exists hasn't been very well communicated. So a couple of things should jump out at you. I'm sure it will, because many of you are kind of data hounds. The first is there are not many dots below the mean line by the slope of one. So that there are in most areas, workers have a significantly less favorable view of how these touch points are conducted inside the company than employers do. Great inflation is alive and well. It's not only at Harvard. Therefore, you see the high net promoter scores that companies are giving themselves relative to the quite low net promoter scores the workers are providing in key areas. Also, it's apparent that employers don't understand the lives of their low-wage workers. So we ask them, tell us, is your employer aware of, or do they give you an opportunity to discuss some of the challenges you face around work, whether it's scheduling concerns as first, all the way down to the biggest spread, which is household financial circumstances, and also very close to that, your transportation needs. So employers don't really understand what's motivating low-wage workers to stay or go, what pressures they're under. Another way to think about this is how you might want to think about terms and conditions of employment to make staying in your employment more plausible for these low-wage workers, so that, once again, investing in them to be more productive, therefore turn over less, therefore get you off that carousel of endlessly replacing 2/3 of your workforce every year, could be addressed. And to make a more pointed view of this, we asked low-wage workers, what are the 5 factors that are most important for you in your decision to work for a company? Convenience of location is number 1, how easy it is to get to work. That doesn't even appear on the top 5 of employers' answer to the same question. And level of pay obviously counts. We all, in some ways, we ought to strip that out because big asymmetries in level of pay would obviously motivate things. Job security, stability of employment is more important, statistically significantly more important to the worker than the employer applies to it. So there's very real data here that suggests a couple of things. Employers are not delivering practices that, in a way, that workers find accessible, and they're not doing it very often. That's the divide on the Net Promoter Score slide. And also, employers don't really understand the lives of these lower wage workers. So in implementing those touch points I talked about, those dots, they often implement them against an avatar of their low wage workers, a caricature of that low wage worker, which is incorrect. Now, look, your workforce segments and these needs would vary by any individual, but a process that even understands that variability is going to be superior to one that relies on misapprehensions as captured on this slide. Now, here's one of 3 or 4 of the most important touch points, the most determinative touch points. This has to do with actionable feedback. And what this shows you, a couple of sets of query contrasting the data. For workers that did not move up, employers said 43% of the time they just didn't have the soft skills. They didn't have the interaction skills, the teaming skills, the communication skills, the attention to detail. Well, that's interesting because only 8% of the low-wage workers who had not moved up said, yeah, it's really a soft skills problem. Now, an employer might look at that and say, well, it's really hard to give negative feedback and people don't believe it, and they don't care, and they don't know what we're really looking for, and to quote Peanuts, yada, yada, yada. But if you've got a performance evaluation system, supervisors who are giving feedback to workers such that they can act on it, know what kind of skills they need to develop to even be considered to be advanced, and you've got that type of gap, you've got an ineffective performance management system. You've got an ineffective feedback system. And look on the other side, technical skills as well, a huge spread between employers saying, look, these guys just don't have the technical skills. I couldn't advance them if I wanted to, but the workers don't know that. So how is it that even if you're expecting them to go and be that Horatio Alger person and go to community college on their own time and pay for it, or do online learning, or go to Toastmasters and learn to be more articulate. If they don't know they need to do that, they can't exercise that self-efficacy I talked about earlier in terms of developing better pathways to being more productive, being a more valuable employee, and having a more stable lifestyle, being a better parent, spouse, kid, citizen. Now, what are the areas in which employers have a different understanding of the pathways required, the skills and actions required to advance someone? That circle, that's the crimson circle toward the top of the chart, versus where there are differences between the evaluation of employers and workers versus where they're similar. And once again, you'll notice that the similarities are fewer and far between, and they're mostly in areas like pre-employment, where the workers and the employers kind of describe the same process. When you get into the gray dots, pathways to employment, where the dark blue dots, supervision and mentorship, look how they're all clustered in areas where there's a very real difference in the evaluation of the employer versus the workers as to how well the company operates and how well, how clear and impactful the policies the company have installed are. This gets really interesting when you get down to those critical attributes in which the workers who said, I did get promoted, say there was an important impact on the fact I got promoted. That's the top band here, versus their peer group that didn't get promoted. So workers who have achieved upper mobility almost half the time said, I had regular performance reviews. Only a third of the workers that didn't get promoted said, I've had regular performance review on the far left-hand side. Those who get promoted said, I had an opportunity to get the skills and training I needed to get promoted 37% of the time in the crimson, whereas workers who've not, only less than a quarter of the time. And you can see the same data in terms of the skills and training programs. So the environment for workers who have moved up is a different one than those who didn't move up. And this is very much about where the company invests its time and how much value attaches to having internal promotion, internal pathways, grow from within, a policy, a deliberate approach for reducing turnover in these low-skilled roles. In many ways, this is the most sobering piece of data I'm going to show you. So we isolated those 5 variables that are highly determinative of whether or not someone advances out of that low wage cohort, those 2 different cohorts of workers. And we asked, in the dark blue squares, senior managers, in the mustard colored circles, middle level managers, in the crimson triangles, frontline managers, and in the light blue diamonds, the actual low wage workers themselves, how would you evaluate the company's performance on these 5 variables? Wow. Great inflation is alive and well, and it lives in the C-suite. Senior executives give themselves, on the whole, very high marks for what they actually do along these 5 dimensions. Well, it's kind of interesting because down the organization structure from there, getting to those circles, the middle level managers, you know what? They're not so sure. That's a very big drop off down in terms of how well are we actually doing these things. Versus look at those frontline manager scores. With the exception of holding regular performance reviews, not talking about the effectiveness of the performance review, just the fact it was done regularly. Their scores are close to or worse than the worker scores. So you can see there are kind of 2 worlds at work here. There's the world of the shop floor, of the frontline supervisor and those low wage workers, and they kind of see the world similarly. And then there's the world of the C-suite, who will, I believe, absolutely be able to pass a lie detector test when quizzed on, do you have career pathways? The FBI agent or whomever administered the sodium pentothal, they would get through it. They believe it. They believe that we regularly communicate to workers what it takes. That's funny because the workers don't think it happens, which means senior management have policies, they've got beliefs, they've got binders, they've got lucite blocks, they've got posters in cafeterias. but they don't have a policy in action. It's not actually being executed in a way that manifests itself consistently to the people who are supposed to be benefiting from it. And let's not forget, in benefiting, these workers benefiting from this, the company benefits too. They get lower turnover, they get higher engagement, they get higher productivity. And they get another thing. Remember, these are diverse workers, disproportionately diverse workers. Every large company I know right now is falling all over itself to try to improve its DEI performance. And I've been studying this for 10 years. And before that, I worked with senior executives in very large companies. I've never seen a higher level of sincerity and commitment to that. And we should be excited about that. But if we define that as now we have to go out in the merchant market, the spot market for diverse talent and hire, everyone's going to be chasing the same talent. And if you're not a preferred employer, you're not an employer in a location that has a diverse talent pool with the skills you need, if you're not an employer that has a good reputation with diverse talent for having, being effective and cultivating leadership and having a commitment to diversity that predates the murder of George Floyd and the terrible events of the summer of 2020, you need to be broadening your aperture to be considering how do we take the diverse workers we've got who are going to be more heavily weighted at the lower end of your skills and wage distribution and turn them into what we need. How do we grow our own as opposed to poach somebody else's? And whether it's diversity, inclusion, productivity, reducing turnover, we have to cause the gap between the stylized understanding that senior executives have of what goes on the shop floor, how effectively policies are implemented, and what the lives of these workers are like with the realities of all of those things. These gaps have got to get much reduced if we're going to have an effective response. So it's funny because despite all of these things I've said that suggest that companies treat low-wage workers as commodities, they in fact say, like clockwork, nope, they're important to our strategic success now and in the future. And when we looked at, I characterize, please realize I'm trying to cover 30,000 words in 35 minutes, but when we looked at so-called good employers, one that consistently implement the types of policies in a way that those workers can understand them and benefit from them and access them by overcoming things like tuition, or we only reimburse tuition when you finish, or you have to work here for 6 months before this benefit kicks in or that benefit kicks in. Look what happens. Look what happens. When companies very deliberately cultivate these upward mobility practices, they get benefits across the board, benefits that are measurable and measurable with data. We're getting increased productivity, increased morale, increased retention, increased attendance, better safety. We have less disruption of costing or of training or supervising new employees. So just to, I thought to conclude, but for some reason there we go. What in brief, what should happen? We have to recognize low-wage employees are critical assets. We have to make retention integral to our strategy as opposed to the blitheful assumption that turnover is inevitable. We have to think about growing our own diversity from this big pool of talent that we can evaluate for advancement based on a personnel file, not a resume. We have to focus on the three things that drive the difference between people who've gotten out of these wage trap jobs, which are direct mentorship, career pathways, and learning and development that fill those soft and hard skills gaps so that people can be more productive. We have to use metrics to assess implementation and the economics of all this. That's your job. And we also have to understand that there are external implications to our ability to do this, whether that's customer satisfaction, the way policymakers view us, the way local civic leaders and social groups view us. In a world of Glassdoor and Fishbowl and social media, it's going to be increasingly expensive and dangerous to be a firm that has a poor reputation in these areas specifically for their treatment of low-wage workers. And if you don't believe me, look at the metamorphosis at Walmart in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, Walmart was being pilloried for, they had workers that had to get SNAP assistance. They had workers who were sleeping in their cars to be on time for their shift. They were viewed as a completely callous employer. And under their current management team, in many ways, they are the leader in addressing these problems. But as much as I like to believe that that is solely expression of better, more thoughtful thinking by the executive leadership of Walmart, it was clearly also a function of the shock they got to the system, where people said, we don't care that your goods are affordable, we don't care they're good value if they're coming at the expense of different conditions for your workers, which is what did happen to them. And they have now, and Doug McMillan and his team, a team they're not doing this under duress, they're doing this because they understand it's good business. So I'm going to stop sharing then. Usually my in-person performances, I have complimentary analgesics because I've given everyone a headache by talking so long and fast. But I'd be delighted to hear any comments or questions. Maybe Jeremy or Stella, you can tell me if the chat has led to some questions that you think people would enjoy hearing my responses to.
Absolutely. First, thank you, Joe, for running through that as well. And I'll lead us off with a question, particularly on the signal loss. So it seems like a fair amount of your life as a CEO and an advisor, and this work have a connection point, which is you've seen how companies and organizations can truly listen and be connected to some of the things that you're looking at here. If you were to ascribe a couple of your own hypotheses to, these are the actions that analysts can take to help reduce signal loss or to increase influence, to bring those, as I think about your chart there, bring the blue squares and those and the worker teal diamonds ish closer. What do you have any hypotheses on this?
Yeah, well, the first is to have some common agreement on what's a relevant metric. I'll give you an illustration, and because Stella has vouched for all of you personally and individually, I'm going to say a couple of things that might be viewed as intemperate in other audiences. If a CHRO or a board of directors thinks that what a good measure of engagement with the workforce is an employee attitude survey, they're not looking at the right metric. The many of you are professional analysts of data. You know a bad question when you read one. So if you have also a metric that is actually linked to business outcomes, nothing I'm talking about here is about feeling good about yourself. You can feel good about yourself too, but it's about productivity, it's about continuity of employment, about better relationships with customers, about better morale, better engagement, less absenteeism. And so what are some metrics that we'd like to track so we can get more of that? Well, let's look at frontline supervisors in terms of what percentage of the people that entered the workforce in our company for that supervisor ever got advanced. How the average tenure of people who entered the workforce working for that frontline supervisor. So we can isolate metrics that actually have a clear line of sight to performance on these areas. And once you've got an agreement, we all know what gets measured gets managed. So if we can get the right metrics, you've got a much better shot of saying, here we've got an anomaly. Why does the Waterloo warehouse look like the Battle of Waterloo? There's so many corpses strewn around versus the Trafalgar warehouse where nobody ever leaves. Okay, well, maybe it's the manager, or maybe it's local labor market conditions, or maybe it's Amazon moved in down the street or whatever, but at least we know. And the vast majority of people I've ever worked with at all levels of an organization are generally trying to do a good job to the best degree they understand it. So this isn't let's identify the miscreants and fire the bad frontline supervisors. Maybe no one's ever told them they're bad frontline supervisor, and no one's ever told them that rather than their first reaction to someone being late for the second time in a week would be to say, you understand if you're late another time this month, I'm firing you. To say, hey, you've been late a couple of times this week, what's going on? And then if the person says, well, I missed the bus and I stayed out late too much, okay, then you can fire them if they're late another time this month. But if they say, in Boston, the Mass Transit Authority is called the MBTA. The MBTA has, changed the bus schedule. It's really hard for me to get here now. Now we can at least have an informed discussion.
Yeah, yeah, that was a powerful note there, too. Oh, Jen, go ahead.
Hi, Joe. Good to see you again. This was
Hi, Jen.
fantastic. And, I'm a big
Thank
supporter of everything you just said. But I wonder if you could comment on, given that 44% of jobs are low wage, when we talk about career pathways, it really relies on the concept of pyramids, right? So there's not enough good jobs for people to move into, even if we solve the leadership problem.
Yep.
What's your thought about that, and particularly for this audience?
Yeah, first of all, you've cut right to the quick, and it's a really hard issue. And one of the things that I didn't cover, just in the interest of time, is a disproportionate number of people who advance changed industries, and they tend to change industries from industries that often have a high ratio of frontline workers to supervisors. In advanced manufacturing, it's often 30-1. To a much lower ratio. So just literally the math of advancement, the pyramid was more isosceles than it was, like the pyramid on a dollar bill. And the so that's part of it. Part of it is we have to acknowledge something, and I promise not to turn this into a separate seminar, but right now the U.S. is really well configured to create a large number of people who are not entering the workforce equipped for employment beyond for a fairly simple job. If you are not confident in your numeracy, or you're actually innumerate, and you have very little social skills development and very little opportunity to learn at work, not to learn about work. So, if I could wave a magic wand, we'd have massive expansion of work-based learning for teenagers in the United States, significant expansion in college and community colleges of co-op type programs, so that the employer is seeing a kid, a student who they don't expect to walk in the door and be productive. And there's a mutual learning. It's renting to own for the employer. But the other thing I would just say is, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy here, which is if you can't get people with skills, companies don't throw up their hands and say, oh, I guess we won't grow. Well, let's throw our strategy out the window. They say, we're going to have to find ways to get people more productive. So they invest in more technology that requires more skills, that becomes a better paying job. So we just had to get more people on intercept course with those developments. And people understand the process and understand the company and like working there and want to stay, have a lot to offer versus someone who's sampling. And this is one of the things I think a lot of employers don't understand. They think of someone they're going to hire in from the outside as the day they're hired in, that now they're an employee and they'll look like all the other employees. No, they're this is dinner and a movie. Right. So and particularly in a labor market where so many of the skills that are actually important to realizing a competitive strategy are going to be harder and harder to get. So it's just plain stupid to have people that want to work for your company invite them to leave consistently on the basis that they'll just get replaced from something called the labor market, which is going to be super tight and expensive.
Thank you.
Not that I feel strongly about it.
Thank you. We'll go over to Anna.
Joe, thanks so much. I'm a big fan of the podcast. That's where I get the information first. And then obviously meeting you in person here is tremendous. Couple of questions and thoughts. A lot of your research is focused on companies and you referenced that you were looking internationally as well, but this is a very US specific research because, and I know you do work across cultures. If you look at apprenticeship models in Northern Europe that are very effective, and that's connected to my question around, in the US, the expectation is that the company and especially CEOs are going to be doing all this work, or at least be aware of it. And that's very good. How much of it is a responsibility of the broader community? You already mentioned the schools that are failing in the US, right? But if you look at the apprenticeship models, for example, that are very successful in Switzerland and Germany, for example, that's not just the enterprise. That is a kind of social structure.
Right.
And that mentoring that, as you pointed out, is absent in
Right.
the US and kind of distributed between all of these different types of employers is
Mhm.
actually consistent if it is delivered through, it's not the government, but it is the local community, local government, et cetera. So
Right.
are there systems that you've been looking at, like the nonprofit sector? We
Yeah.
looked at in New York City, for example, we've got, how much was it, Stella? About 1,500 different nonprofit organizations that are set up to specifically
Yep.
support people. So
They're
can you
beginning-
comment on that?
Yeah, that's a problem actually. There's the worst performing high school in Boston, by the way, has 95 separate not-for-profits trying to work with their student body, and they finally started banning them visiting all the time because it was so disruptive of education. So you said a lot, and Stella will have to get a second hour for us, but I just let me say 3 or 4 things. First of all, the European systems are variable in their impact and are proving they have real problems with emerging skills. And here I'm talking about meetings I've been having, for example, with the German BDA, which would be kind of a combination of the conference board, the business roundtable, and the Chamber of Commerce. They're like, our system can't teach digital skills. The velocity is too fast. None of the incumbent workers have them. A lot of our jobs are in Mittelstand companies, which are laggards. The second thing, if you look at Switzerland, if you're an employer, 70% of Swiss students are coming at you through the apprenticeship system. So all your policies and procedures have got to be architected around that reality. Why are people like Siemens and Zurich Re pioneers in the United States of work-based learning? Because all their global policies align to that, and they don't have any choice. Basically, I mean, they do have a choice, but that's a reflex for them. There are a lot of barriers to this, starting with the teachers' unions in the United States. My wife is an elected Democratic official, so please don't make any attributions to me about my political leanings. But she's also a mayor, which means she has to deal with the teachers' unions all the time. So maybe you now can attribute to something to me accurately about my leanings. The first place to fix this is by at the community college level, changing the way what type of learning is supported by student loans and grants in the United States. The second is to get more employers to understand that this problem is going to get away without more activism there. And their employers take a company like exemplary employer, Koch Industries in Wichita. When they've got a big plant, they go to local elected officials and say, I'm not expanding the plant until I have some solution to this. And you get attention when you say that. But it's going to be a very hard slog. And the final thing we can do is just legitimize it. Unfortunately, in the United States, vocational education was often used for segregation purposes, to discriminate particularly against African Americans. Therefore, it effectively became outlawed. And 40% of today's 18-year-olds are going to go to college, graduate from a 4-year institution. So the whole cultural narrative in the United States of, got to go to college to make it in America, well, that's really comforting to the 60% of kids that aren't, including the 75% of African American kids who aren't. We have to make toggling back and forth like the Swiss do pretty elegantly. And it's going to be more like the Danish system if we're ever going to do something, because the Danes don't track. In Germany, an educational administrator tells you that your kid's not going to college when that kid is 13 or 14. And I don't know about you, but with a number of concealed carry states there in the United States, I'm not signing up for that, because you're not going to get through a day before one of those parents goes nuts on you. So there are a lot of impediments to this. One glimmer of hope is that technology is actually, we're getting some decent places now with some technology. A little company, not getting faster quickly, called Skillset out of Israel, where they use simulation for entry-level jobs, and just 4 or 5 simple 5-minute simulations. And what happens? That low-wage candidate gets a quick preview of some of the work-based learning. This is what this would be like. So we reduce mismatches, because they don't start heading for something that they're going to hate in reality or not be any good at. But the employer also says, gee, Jeremy, Stella, and Joe are 3 candidates. They each did the 5 simulations. Joe was terrible on all but one of them. We know that correlates with failure, so we're not going to offer him. Stella was great at 2, 3, and 4. Those are the most illustrative of someone who's going to be a success here. And Jeremy was really bad at 3, but good at 2, 4, and 5. He's going to need this. Our data now suggests, because we've got good HR data analysis, that this is what Jeremy's missing. And we can now look at interventions we've made in our actual workers that remediated that. He's spending his first 10 days in whatever it is, whatever training or mentorship situation, to be able to suppress that quick twitch muscle reaction he has that's inhibiting his performance. But we can build around what he's got. He's not as good as Stella. You already all knew that, but he's got a good chance.
Sorry,
So,
Jeremy.
Joe, let's hinge this into as you move into the area of skills and skills granularity.
Mm-hmm.
We noticed in the paper you've been working with some of the kind of friends of the group, Burning Glass, and our friends over there too, and rapidly we are coming to a place where skills granularity is no longer a theory, but it's actually becoming working practice inside of many companies, and can do the type of work that you're just talking about here. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then if anyone in the corporate side wants to chime in on what they are doing in these areas, that would be great too. But the space of the next role and what you're talking about here, it seems like we're opening up opportunity with some of the work that Burning Glass is doing, or 110, or the idea that I know you've thought about of good jobs as well too. Where is your head going with that kind of, with the next step, and what is the role that greater skills granularity might play that we should be thinking about?
Well, I'm dying to hear your other members talk about this, so I'll try to be atypically, or for me, brief. The first place is for companies to continue to be more and more disciplined about isolating a limited number of skills that actually correlate with productivity and potential for advancement. We significantly over rely on proxies, and so we're guessing. And then there are 15 of them, which is another endemic problem in HR. There are 15 of them embedded in job descriptions or more and the evaluation system. And then we're telling people, well, in your balanced scorecard, now many low-wage workers don't have one, but balanced scorecard invented at the Harvard Business School, very seldom actually implemented in a way that actually helps anybody. Because if you've got 30 variables by 15 considerations, you're not respond. I'll get you an autograph if you send it to me. Bob's a good friend of mine. But you can't manage 30 things in 15 ways and expect anybody to be accountable, because there's always something out of their control, so that doesn't count for anything. Another thing is that what we're getting in terms of the tools like Pymetrics to get a better view of aptitude, and then lots of different modalities of training to try to, it's one thing I think a lot of HR functions don't get wrong, is they're always looking around to say, here's someone's talent, or here's the what do they call it, the superpower that I'm not I didn't like comics as a kid, and I don't like movies that are based on comics as a adult. So I guess I'm once again out of step with contemporary society. But we need this superpower. Often the way you improve a worker's performance is by reducing their areas where they're the biggest deficit. So you're not trying to make them expert, you're just trying to make them less bad or less incompetent. And I think the final thing is things like Open Skills Network. I mean, all the things that get more data flowing between companies. This gets back to the observation about there are 8,000 employer groups in Germany that define skills, and the entire education system is designed to receive those messages. In the United States, I've had instances of one hospital being unwilling to tell other hospitals what it's trying to train in customer liaison people, because it's part of our competitive advantage. If we tell them, they'll steal all our great ideas. Well, I know what they're saying too, and your ideas are not original. In fact, the job is sufficiently straightforward. Everyone's got the same ideas. It's so secret, we can't tell anybody. So but I am, and despite my fire and brimstone tone on a lot of the stuff, Jeff, Jared, we can see there are vectors that are getting better, in part because there's just a lot of unmet need to fix these problems, and that's beginning to encourage the entrepreneurial community, the technology community, to look in new directions.
Yeah, it seems like we have hit a breaking point in there too, and I would invite anyone who's working on skills or this area to kind of chime in, particularly if you're in companies or in organizations. Look, our organization is investing in this area and trying to run at this as fast as we possibly can as well. So we happen to be one of the founding members for 110, which of course is working on some of these issues and bringing some to light. But that's one of many kind of great venues that can work on. And any thoughts from the wider community on this particular topic? It's okay. If not, we'll also look in the text as well. Got it. So we have time for, let's say, one or two more questions. I do see a few in the in the chat as well. The as we look at, so John, you asked a question about kind of influencing the C-suite, particularly in cost of goods sold as well too. If you're still on, I think you are too. Would you mind just jump on camera and if you would, just try to see if you can summarize the question.
Hey, John, this is Chris. I was just going to ask about the, there's a lot of pressure right now on the C-suite to reduce turnover, and they're very concerned about that for sure. I think a lot of companies, especially the C-suites, are reluctant to make any changes to the wages that will affect their cost of goods sold and effectively the gross profit. What would you say to them if that was their concern?
Well, you've got to, first of all, it's completely legitimate concern, and acting like it isn't is insulting everyone's intelligence. And if you want to get your intelligence insulted, talk to a not very engaged legislator about how you can endlessly increase the unit cost of labor and there's no consequence other than the people they want to have make more can make more. I won't go into the details, but suffice to say, the mayor of Seattle, when he had nonlinear increase in linear wage, hired a team from the University of Washington to study the outcome. And when their outcome was that basically there was no effect because about a third of the workers lost their jobs and about a third of the workers worked less hours and a third of the workers benefited, his solution was to hire an economist from Berkeley to say they were wrong. So, this is a real problem, but I think the answer lies in your all-in lifetime economics. If you view a $2 wage as all that happened is my margin shrank by 0.1%, it's always going to be a last resort issue. If you're saying, if I'm going to feather in annual bonuses, but people who stay 3 years, that converts to an increase in their wages. And if I say I'm going to now set this is going to be part of a holistic strategy to build the skills capabilities of these workers and invest in them so they have greater confidence that they'll be able to respond to whatever's next in our process and technology. Or you beginning to change both the numerator and the denominator. And if it's just one variable and there's another way to put this, and I understand that this is probably not something any of you can use with your bosses, but the cost of inertia is not zero. I'm sorry. So a lot of companies are like, well, anything we do now costs more, but we do now is no cost us. I hope they're not a graduate of our school, because that's pretty lousy management thinking, and too many of them are. So but they graduated before I was on the faculty, I guess. So in any case, I think if we can't dismiss it, we can't poo-poo it. Companies aren't being run for the greater good; they're being run the interest of their shareholders. And yes, they're broader stakeholders, and those things are getting more aligned than they used to. But without changing the calculus a little bit, I said earlier, a lot of companies have, 2 variables and a 7 variable equation with coefficients greater than 0, and they treat the other 5 as not relevant, and they're just wrong. And when you get some coefficients, they're not 0.5s and 0.8s, but you get 5.1s all of a sudden, it's a big part of the outcome.
Mm-hmm. So Joe, well, let's close with a positive deviance type of question. And it's a version of what gives you hope for change to either some organizations, you mentioned a few that you think are just nailing it, and you think that while one should not replicate, but patterns, companies, leaders that you say, when I see that person, I feel like there's hope.
Yeah. Well, I think the people who make the most progress are the ones who appreciate how hard this is and are experimenting.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to say a couple of things that are going to be a little bit strange answers, but what's really surprising? How many of the big private equity groups have called me up in the last 3 months? Okay. They want to job quality wash their business model. And my attitude about that is, I don't care why you're doing it. If you want to do good things, God bless you.
Were they doing that for their own enterprise or for their investments?
They're doing it. They want to do it for their portfolio companies. It's kind of, here I will admit, longtime friend of mine, Mitt Romney, he really got killed a few times on, Bain Capital invested in a portfolio company and they didn't treat workers well, therefore he's responsible. And these were even for companies that they invested in long after he was gone. But it doesn't matter, it stuck. And if you were, this is not one of the companies I'm talking to, but if you were at a Schwartzman's company, I can't remember what it's called. You basically made $1 billion last year. I'm not kidding, $1 billion, not D. You're eager to defend yourself from being called a robber baron, open print, even though you are one, close print. So that, I think technology gives me a lot of hope. But the thing that really gives me hope here, Jeremy, is that it's inarguable the current system doesn't work. Only the bitter enders and the NEA and the American Federations of Teachers and the people who are support them politically. And when you talk to them, when I was at one of the state education associations the other day, and a lot of the local union presidents were at the meeting, and they're desperate to find out new solutions. Now, when I say what K through 12 situation, systems do you admire and you really think do a great job, and they say Finland and Sweden, I leave out the part that in both of those countries, the funding goes with the student, and they're hugely dynamic blends of purely public and private school, and the state pays for all of it, and that you have to be in the top third of your class to get a teaching job in a public school in Finland in the discipline that you're going to teach. We don't have this teacher's degree nonsense where you studied, you got a teacher's degree, so now you're going to teach chemistry even though you failed it in high school. So there's that. And there are companies, Disney, huge low workforce, thinking, as is Amazon, think about it, how do we make this job a springboard for our workers to land on their feet in a decent job, not working for us. You've got, I mentioned HEB, you've got I think Amazon, like Walmart, is really working this hard. You also have individual companies. You can see this in just making a little sunshine, if you will. Another way to think about this is Maricopa Community College, Monroe Community College in Rochester, New York, Northern Virginia, Macomb in Detroit. The big one in Orlando, whose name suddenly escapes me, the Miami-Dade. We're getting better and better execution by community college, San Jacinto, where they're working that learning gaps data. They see a job pop up, they don't know what it is. They go to the employer and say, "What do you need?" A good example from I can't remember the one in Orlando. It's really outstanding. they just noticed there are a tremendous number of good paying property manager jobs in the Orlando area. So what do? They went around to a bunch of people that own apartment buildings and developments, found out what a property management job was, developed a curriculum. Now in Tallahassee, it's way easier to get a new credential approved than it is in Albany or Boston, but they went to that trouble and boom. So, you know, we're getting there. But we're going to have a fiasco with the kids that have missed these 2 years of school. And so this problem is going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
I said one thing I want to come back to. A couple of people, someone mentioned the 1,500 not-for-profits in New York. I wrote a paper that's available on my website called Working to Learn. And it looked at 350 not-for-profits in the employment, education employment space. It really showed that a lot of their models are not well thought out, very narrow, very much oriented toward college matriculation, not even college completion. And these are wonderful people doing the Lord's work, but then they desperately need employers to connect with, and they're not even trying. So, you know, we got to get out of the CSR business on this front. We've got to get in the clear-eyed, steely-eyed, hard-nosed capitalism business and help those not-for-profits intervene in ways that actually lead to outcomes, as opposed to lead to a further revision of the theory of change that isn't actually working.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, this has been a really great conversation, and Joe, thank you for spending some time with us and sharing this as well. And I would say for everyone, so just because there was no dollar assigned to attending this, it's not free. So what's the payment? The payment is feedback on experiences that you've had in these areas as well. And Joe, you are welcome also to ask for input and the extension of your network to this network too, to ask questions and to seek partnerships. You know, particularly when it comes to data, the simple fact is that we know where the data is, and there's a lot of it.
Yep.
Too.
That's a generous offer.
Our end size is large.
And any participant that has specific questions or comments, Stella can give you my reach information, and I'm more disciplined in my use of time and less emphatic in small groups.
Excellent. Thank you for that, and thank you everyone for joining. I do want to mention one thing about kind of what I hope will be a future session for this group as well, and it's something I've not been able to say before, which is that two of our greatest supporters and co-founders have a book coming out, and we want to hear from them too. But like, you know, someone's got to invite them, so I'm going to invite them to do it, which is Stella, of course, and Anna Tavis with their book Humans at Work, coming out in just 2 or 3 weeks.
Yes. Thank you.
As well too. So we hope you will accept at some point. I'll talk to your agents, I'll talk to your people, and their people will talk to other people too to make that happen as well. And for those that do happen to be in the New York, New Jersey, and surrounding areas too, I look forward to at some point, maybe in 2022, we can see each other in flesh and confirm that we're not just avatars sitting all around the world
in a simulation. Yep.
Right, exactly. Yeah. More of that. So with that, we'll close out with a great thank you to you, Joe. Thank you to everyone in attendance as well, and wishing you a great night, and for some of you morning as well. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.